Namaste, everybody. North American Hindu Association is privileged to speak to Jeffrey Armstrong, also known as Rishi Kavindra. He is a yogi adept at challenging your mind and opening your heart to new world that is a perfect blend of modern science and timeless wisdom of ancients. I would have loved to address him by his first name, as most Westerners do, but my conscience stops me from doing so for a guru who is also a relationship expert, philosopher, practitioner, and teacher of the Vedas of for over 40 years. It would be only wise on my part to refer him as Jeffrey G. Prior to being a Vedic teacher, Jeffrey G had a successful career as an executive in Silicon Valley for 15 years and spent 5 years in an ashram as a monk. He was a speaker for Fortune 500 companies and was written about regularly in USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, LA Times, San Jose Mercury News, Discover Magazine, CNN, and many others. Not just that, Jeffrey G is also an award-winning poet, best-selling author of many books, including Spiritual Teachings of the Avatar, Ancient Wisdom for a New World, and has been featured in CBC documentary Planet Yoga, Wings of Yoga, and 2014 Leo Award documentary Take Back Your Power. It is a pleasure to be his audience because his clear perspectives on world issues, humorous approach, and compassionate touch take them on a memorable journey. He is with us today to talk about Sanatan Dharma, which is the heart of Hinduism. Namaste, Jeffrey Ji, and thank you for your time. How are you doing today?
Namaste, Pushpa. Well, I'm doing very well, thank you. We live in a beautiful spot, Sandy and I, and it isn't difficult for yogis to be confined because we know what to do. So that is lovely. And whenever I hear a beautiful introduction like that, I must begin saying Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshvara, Guru Sakshat, Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, because I am only who I am now because of the great gurus from Bharat who brought their wisdom to the West. And I was hungry for it, received it, and it has defined my life ever since.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Now, the first question to you, Jeffrey Ji, and I'm sure my audience would also love to know, you were born in a Western society to Christian parents. You had a successful corporate career in Silicon Valley. What attracted you to the Vedic culture?
Well, I think the best way to answer that is that I started out dissatisfied with my own culture at a very young age. By about 8 years old, I started sensing that the story I was being told left me with a bunch of questions that nobody wanted to answer, especially, as it turns out, the ministers and priests and rabbis, because I went to all of them and asked them the questions, and they were a little irritated at my questions. So this showed me that I was on to something. So by the time I went to university, my degrees were psychology and a dual major in English literature poetry. But I read everything I could get my hands on. Then I worked for 3 years at a metaphysical bookstore and read all of the occult and esoteric literature of Western civilization, and inevitably saw the translated Vedic books starting to stream into Western culture. And once I started reading the knowledge from Bharat, it's the same thing that happened when I first tasted curry. It became my favorite restaurant. So it's pretty clear to me that I was doing this in a previous life, because as soon as I smelled the fragrance of the lotus and tasted curry, as the saying goes, the British colonized the world for 300 years with gunpowder, and India took it back over in 30 years with curry powder. So I was captured by the culture and the wisdom.
That's it. Thank you. That was very interesting. Now comes my Next question to you, since you are a Vedic teacher. Who is a Hindu?
It is one of the most beautiful and confusing to the rest of the world truths. I've made up a saying about this, that in order to be a Hindu, you must have a certain etiquette with regard to all living entities. I call it the Namaste culture, because all Hindus see all living entities as having an Atma and being immortal beings wearing a costume. And we don't look at the costume first, we look at the Atma first and say, na, ma, te, not me, but you. For a moment, we bow to that potential in them, even if it hasn't come out yet. We bow to that first. So this means whatever we wish to share with others, we never use coercion and we never do conversion. We only share by conversation. So a Hindu is someone who sees us as immortal beings on a long, interesting journey from another realm called Brahman. Here in the realm of Prakriti or matter, they feel compassion for everyone, that it's not an easy thing to do. They admire them because they're on an adventure, and they hope to have a reasonable conversation with them, but they will not force that conversation. That is not the way Hindus behave, because we feel ahimsa is also not disrespecting others' right to embrace the view they want to. So this makes the general definition a very polite, respectful, and humble, and sincere, and caring population who will not impose their views upon anyone by violence.
That was a wonderful explanation, Jeffrey ji. Now my next question, which I'm sure have vexed many other non-Sanatanis too. Why do Hindus have so many gods? Like many say they have 33 million gods or 33. How do you explain that?
Well, when someone asks me that, I say, well, let me ask you, why does FedEx have so many employees? Are they all the president? When the FedEx person comes to the door, should I say Mr. President? Or are they a worker? But the president's a worker too, but does anyone really confuse the workers with the president? Not really, because the president has all the powers and the workers have a certain assigned power that they can exercise. So the problem is not this as an idea, it's the misuse of the English word God. Because in Christianity, where God is a go-to word, it's not a Vedic word, it's not a Sanskrit word per se.
Yeah.
But for Christians, they should not say many gods, because we don't. We're not confused that Ganesha is not the ultimate supreme reality, but we know everyone is connected to it. But this is where the confusion came, that it sometimes angered and sometimes confused the Abrahamic religions to see us bowing even to trees. So I'll tell you a great story, that when the British went to India, I like to call India Bharat, when the British went to Bharat, they saw people at the base of a fruit tree, a mango tree, offering it pranams and putting tilak on the tree and showing signs of adoration for the tree. And they thought, what ignorant, foolish people would do that? But they didn't know the particular meditation that goes with the mango tree. It is that when humans have all the fruit, when we're wealthy and powerful, we don't bow to anyone. But when the mango tree is full of fruit, instead of keeping it all, its branches bow down so we can pick it. So just to understand that moment, they would have had to stop colonizing and ask the person, could you explain to me what you're doing? Really? And of course the person wouldn't say, the tree is the source of everything. Everything comes from this tree, this mango tree. That's absurd. So if there are many angels, why aren't there many devas and devis? So if we use the right name, it's no longer confusing. Because we didn't say Deva Deva, we didn't say Parama Ishvara, we didn't say the ultimate supreme being. We said there's many helpers making life possible. That shouldn't be confusing to anyone who's intelligent.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Now, the next very important questions. Unlike other religions, we do not have just one book. It's just collection of knowledge. Sanatan Dharma is collection of knowledge. And the two most important books or the epics, I would say, are Ramayana and Mahabharata. Now, many people argue that, they are just stories, or whereas some people say that they are real-time events. So what is your take on that? Are they real-time events of the past, or just the mythological epics, as people say?
All right, so let's take that as two questions, one within the other. So I'll start with the first one. Imagine that you're about to go to graduate school at Harvard, and you've paid $300,000 tuition for the year, and you go to the counselor who's introducing you, and they say, "Welcome to Harvard, here's your book." Now, you just spent a lot of money to go to school there, and you only get one book. Now compare the same situation, but you get a library card, and they say, "There's the 20-story library. It has the largest collection of books in the world. So which one would you like?" So if you think about it, any intelligent person would like the library, because it's obvious that the book is in the library. So since the Abrahamic people of Judaism and Christianity and Islam are called the people of a book, I call the Vedic civilization the people of a library. So if you don't like learning, then take the one book. I'm sure it's got some truths in it. I know it does. I've studied it. What I actually then say is, well, and also I've read your book. Have you been to our library? If the person says no, then I say, well, then it's hard for you to judge. Yeah. But if you're going to go to the library, let me guide you where to start so you don't get lost, because it's a tall building with a lot of books. So part two of the answer is Shruti Smriti Puranadi Pancharatriki Vidim Vina. There's the Shruti Veda. There's the Smriti Veda, that which was heard, that which was remembered. There's Purana, that which, although old, is as good as new. And then there's Itihas, from which we get the English word history. So the Ramayana and Mahabharata are the accounts of the descent of two avatars of the Supreme Being. So as you said, they're in some ways central, because you could say that the basis of the Vedic civilization is that twice within memory, in the country we now call India, the being everyone else calls Allah or God or Yahweh descended to earth in an apparently human form, stayed on the ground for quite a long time, and an account was written of what they did in Sanskrit, a perfect language that doesn't change over time. And those two descents were greatly instructive to the Vedic civilization and are the place where what everyone else calls the burning bush or the great light made a personal appearance.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Now, there's another controversial question that I'm asking you, Jeffrey. What are your views regarding Aryan invasion theory?
Yes, well, the first thing I would say is it's a viewpoint that's embraced by a civilization that is fond of invading others. So you have to consider the source first. So the Aryan invasion theory was invented by the British while they had invaded and were stealing everything from Bharat. So that doesn't make them very trustworthy to me. It would be like if the Germans wrote a history of Russia.
Yeah.
I would believe that it was in favor of the Germans, not the Russians, because they're enemies. So if somebody tries to write your history while they're stealing everything in your house, I don't think their credibility is very high.
Very true. Very
So
true.
the Aryan invasion theory was invented to suggest that in the past, a group of Caucasians had invaded India. So if they did it, why can't we? It looks like they're a doormat and everyone's invading them. So this makes perfect sense. So don't ask why we're doing it. We're doing it because we can. And we're also doing it because, and this is the truth historically, because the Pope, a little before the time of Columbus, instructed all Catholics, Spanish and Portuguese mostly, to go out in the world and take everything that didn't belong to Christians and convert everyone to Christianity. And it's a historical fact. It's indisputable. The term they used is go discover that place. So this is the Catholic invasion theory, but mine is provable by historical documents that the Catholic Pope told Western civilization, go conquer the world and make them Christians and steal whatever they have. So with that in mind, we should all think, well, I wonder then if we should trust academic theories that are coming from the culture that's colonizing a place. And the answer is no. The long answer is it's now disproven. And one of my dear friends, a great scholar, David Frowley, took it on personally, just as I am doing now, to tell the truth about what's happened, about the terrible invasions of many great cultures throughout the world over the last 300 years. And honestly, it's time our civilizations that we're living in who did that sincerely apologized from the top to the bottom. Only then will it really become history, because we have to learn from history. So I'm still waiting for the apology, and I'm asking the countries in which I was born, the US and Canada, where I now reside, I have passports for both, but I'm saying to them as my responsibility, hey, you invaded, and that's the issue. Don't cover your invasion by saying, well, there was another one before us, because that doesn't help at all. And the country that you stole from was so generous that after you took everything, they said, wait, you forgot the good stuff. And their gurus came to the West in the 60s and gave out the Veda. We thought we'd taken everything, but we hadn't gotten the crown jewels. So personally, I was just at the right age for the karma of my ancestors to give me the Vedic knowledge rather than the spoils of colonization.
That was so beautifully explained, and I wish I could just keep on listening to that more and more. You did say rightly, yes, they had left the good things, the Vedas. Now comes my next questions. Ancient Hindus were quite advanced in various fields, be it science, spirituality, and human values. But in recent centuries, why has Hindu society suffered?
Well, that is a question we could spend quite a bit of time on. So let me say, first of all, I think the good place to start with that is to know that there is now evidence from the Mahabharata, because the Mahabharata has about 250 astronomical observations of the sky at the time that Krishna was on the ground, and that the history at that time was taking place. It has now been proven. A friend of mine named Nilesh Oak has shown conclusively that that was indeed at least 5,000 years ago, because of astronomy and the positions of the planets in the sky and the stars, which are unmistakable once you see their signature. So it is now proven, not theory, that this all took place 5,000 years ago. And at that time, all the rishis got together because the avatar had just been there. Now it was time they realized that the world was going to undergo some serious degradation and disintegration. So they were so insightful, they said, if we don't write our oral tradition of knowledge down, we're going to lose it. This was a massive event. Most people don't talk about this, but it's so important to understand, and it's described in the Bhagavad Purana, especially, that Vyasadeva was writing down all of the Shastra that used to be oral, and in the process, everything that was written down was a preparation for the coming of Kali Yuga, which was just beginning and began during the reign of Parikshit, Arjuna's grandson, after post-Mahabharata.
Yeah.
So the chronological date of that beginning was right then. So they said, if we don't write our culture down, we're going to lose it because things are going to get tough. So this is very important. When you're a colonized civilization, if you have a history like that, it's very important that every colonized person who's trying to recover from that process at least know clearly that their ancestors had a very long vision of what was going to happen historically. So they feel a part of history still rather than simply colonized and displaced. And this has been a little bit missing in the Vedic culture because the colonization was so difficult. But I'm trying to bring back some of these realizations so that longer memory is important. So part 2 of your question, which is that the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, share 2 things in common. One is they both believe the world was created about 6,000 years ago. And the second one is that they are both certain that we only have one lifetime.
Yeah.
So now in Sanskrit, there's a term, Mahatma. Mahatma doesn't mean a historical person named Gandhi. It's a term that means one who holds a big view, who sees everyone as the Atma, but holds a large view of history. So it makes them what we call broad-minded. They hold a bigger perspective.
Okay.
That is being narrow-minded. So in Sanskrit, Mahatma, the opposite is Duratma. Small-minded, small thinking, don't see very far. We call it having blinders on. So the Abrahamic traditions, without being disrespectful to them, this is just the truth of their knowledge and of their beliefs, only believe the world began 6,000 years ago and only believe we have one lifetime. So to a Vedic practitioner, that is narrow-minded. Instead, we see everyone on a long journey,
Right.
a long historical journey. And we don't see them as the car they're driving. So it's simple to say this, the body's called the karana. So I call it the car. That's where the word car comes from in English. So we're all driving a car. So that means what I see first is the outside of your car. I don't see the driver. I see the outside of the car.
True.
That's why we go namaste. We're showing that we don't just look at the car. You don't look at the skin. We don't say black cars are bad. I only like white cars, or red cars scare me, or some superstition. Western civilization has defined itself by having only one life, and therefore the self and the car are identified as the same thing. And this is where all the racial prejudices come from. This is where the historical misunderstanding has come from. It's not a misunderstanding. It's a refusal to listen. And for all the Vedic practitioners, all the Hindus, this is very important to understand. It isn't that they don't get it. It's that they don't want it.
Yeah.
And they say, I don't get it, or that's this, or that's that. But it's just because it's too big a view, number one. And number two, it contradicts their religion. And there's no way to fix this per se. We can't say it's not true, or else we're going beyond polite to not saying the truth as we know it. So when push comes to shove, a Hindu has to say to someone from those 3 traditions, look, I'm glad you have some religion, because we love truth in our culture. But if you think you have all the truth in one tiny little book, I don't think you've studied much. But if you do believe that, as long as you don't force that on anyone else, I'm okay with that. If you like your book, have a nice day.
Really?
But if you put your book in one hand and a gun in the other, we all have a big problem. And it's you've just weaponized your religion. You are not allowed to do that. If you weaponize your religion, you don't get to play the religion card anymore.
Right.
Now you're an enemy. Now you're attacking. No matter what the reason, that's not allowed. Not allowed. So you see the way I'm carefully stepping through this conversation without being offensive or hateful to the other religions, because we aren't a religion in the Vedic civilization. We are a Dharma culture and not a religion. But like everything else, they named India Bharat India, and they named the Vedic Dharma culture a religion. So what I'm about is removing those inappropriate terms, not accepting that these actions within history don't need an apology, they need one, and saying that the wider view held by the Vedic Dharma is immensely superior to a single, narrow-minded, one lifetime view. And if you don't like that, I'm not going to force you to do it. But if you don't like my saying it, I'm sorry, but that's what life is about. You did ask me, meaning the world is asking each other, what do you stand for? And when I say it, I don't say it to undermine you. I say, you've made yourself small-minded. Have you thought about that? If you haven't, go think about it a little and look what would happen if you held a bigger view. So I hope that touches on some of the subjects.
Yeah. You were mentioning about Dharma, Vedic Dharma, or in simpler terms, Dharma. What is Dharma, Jeffrey ji?
All right. So now I'm going to precede that with something that is the current projects I've been working on for the last 10 years, which includes a translation of the Bhagavad Gita, a book called 108 Sanskrit Words Every Yogi Should Know, another book called 108 English Words that were used to colonize Bharat, India.
Interesting.
And the last book is a dictionary of English words that are actually Sanskrit.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So now, every time anyone within the Vedic community is asked a question like, what is the meaning of a Sanskrit word? They should pause and say, I need to take you one step back. Because Sanskrit is a very precise language. It's as if you were a programmer and say, how did you program that particular thing? I'd say the programming language. I'd say with what machine, with what specifications. And you wouldn't say to me, that's too complicated. Just tell me with one word. There's no way to say how I programmed a computer with one word. I need a programming language. So let's start where we need to, which is the programming language of the Vedic civilization is Sanskritam, the most perfect language ever created on this planet that we know of. And that language is agreed by all linguists to be the mother of Greek, Latin, Aramaic, Phoenician, Hebrew, Russian, Scandinavian, Gaelic, Druidic, all of those languages and more, especially then the Romance languages in English, all are children speaking broken Sanskrit. So, just as with Latin, if there's a scientific word created out of Latin terminology, it's because the Latin is more precise. Mm-hmm. That's why science uses Latin.
Yeah.
But they call it a dead language. Because right now, nowhere on our planet is Latin spoken on an everyday basis. But as you well know, in Bharat, there are TV shows and radio shows with millions of listeners and viewers that are entirely in Sanskrit.
Yes.
And Sanskrit is light years more precise than Latin or Greek. So this is going to lead us to two things that we can talk about. One is the immense scientific library that is part of the Vedas, which has been taken piece by piece and made into modern life without credit. The second part is, as soon as someone asks you to define a very deep Sanskrit word, you should pause and say, I need to tell you the root of the word. I can't just tell you a simple definition because English doesn't have an equivalent word. This is the important thing to understand. English does not have an equivalent word, a synonym. So there is no English synonym for Dharma. There's no such word in Latin. There's no such word in French. There's no such word in Italian. There's no such word in German. There's no such word in Russian. And there's definitely no such word in English. And religion is not a synonym with Dharma. But let's break religion down. It's re ligare. And so ligare means tied up. And so re ligare means bound by rules. So the three Abrahamic religions are defined as the people of a book who are bound by a rule book. Okay? That is not the Dharmic culture of Bharat. We have some rule books, but that's not the center of the whole thing. Dharma is the center of the whole thing. So now, with your permission, we'll go to the root, and that's a two-step process. Because the Sanskrit root of that word is dri, D-H-R-I. But even the root dri has a deeper root, which is ri, R-I. It's actually a special character in the Sanskrit alphabet. It's a dot under the R. So it's a trilled R, it's ri. That ri is the root of the first word we need to know, which is ritam, from which we get the English word rhythm, rhyme, arithmetic, written, and a host of others, including ritual. The ri of Sanskrit means the laws of nature.
Wow.
So first, the Vedic culture starts with there are laws of nature, which means nature is purposeful. Laws mean purposeful. It's not random, it's purposeful. So we have to know that and think, in spite of its immensity, reality as we know it within the material world is based on a rule-based system that was purposeful in intention and remains so. Now, this is back to the so-called many gods. They're not many gods. There are many laws of nature that are being conducted by intelligence, which we talk of as the devas and devis, as the many intelligent beings who are assistants in making life possible. Like the person delivering your FedEx. You say thank you. You bow to them a little bit and say, you climbed those stairs to bring me that package, thank you. Yes. Those are the devas and devis who are conducting the ritam. So now that re has a couple of other words that come from it that are crucial. The one is already in English, and it's karma, kri. If you add re to k, you get kri, and then kri gives us the word karma, which means not just cause and effect. It means cause and effect over many lifetimes. Cause and effect until the cause and effect exhausts itself. And the second word is the Dharma word, dri, D-H-R-I. Yeah. The H-R-I is a very special word. In this bottle, I have some water. If it wasn't a liquid, it wouldn't be water. If it couldn't be put in a bottle, it wouldn't be a liquid. In that way. If I couldn't assimilate it, and my body is mostly made of it, so I have to understand the essence of water in order to use it correctly. Yeah. It would be quite awkward if I had poured that over my head right now instead of putting it in my mouth. So there's a correct use of everything. So the word dharma means, the root is dri, and it means the essential nature of a thing, which, if you take that away, it is no longer itself. Oh. That's what the root of dharma means. Therefore, we've just been told two things about being in the material world. One is that everything you touch has repercussions.
Right.
You put a chain of cause and effect into motion. The second is everything you touch already has its own nature. If you don't take the trouble to know what that is, you're probably going to misuse it. But because it's part of a larger system.
Mm-hmm.
This is all just very scientific, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So Dri then means before you go to do anything, try to investigate the essential nature of the thing you're working with. And then try to use it in harmony with the laws of nature. So you could say that a Hindu is a law-abiding citizen of the cosmos, who before they do anything tries to determine the law of nature that affects what they're doing, because they know that they'll be held accountable for whatever they put in motion by their actions, number one. Number two, they know what they do will affect others and they don't want to harm them. So these are the characteristics of a Dharma culture. This means there are rituals that we incorporate into our lives that are designed to allow us to live without causing harm to others, or while causing the least amount of harm to others. So once we know Ri, Kri, and Dri, we're at the position where we can start saying, whose Dharma, the Dharma of what kind of Dharma, in what situation Dharma, and now we're in the courtroom, being much more sophisticated, saying, where were you at that time? What did you do with that? What was the implement? What happened over there? Now it's a jurisprudence conversation. And so if you just go that far, you've done justice to the word Dharma. But you can see why most Westerners don't have the patience or vocabulary or interest to hear that. And almost no one from the Hindu civilization that's out in the world right now has been trained to do what I just did. And so they get confused talking about their culture. They call it a mistaken term like religion, and now they're lost. They can't change the conversation. Game over. Now you've defined yourself in terms of the colonizers instead of in terms of your religion. Not religion. See how easy it would have been? Not that, your Dharma. Your Dharma does it a different way.
So beautifully explained, Jeffrey ji. Even I was not aware. Really well explained. And I'm sure everybody would have loved that explanation of Dharma. Now that brings me to the next question. Because you have studied Vedas, I want to ask you, did Hindu society always lack central authority?
Well, that's a really important question, especially for our current situation. Let's just put it this way. Democracy as we know it, the idea of self-rule by a group of people, originally was tribal, and it came from the northeastern part of the United States. The US Constitution was given to them at the time they were forming the United States by the Iroquois Confederation of First Nations peoples in the eastern seaboard of North America. And democracy, when it works, is when the people all know each other, they know their ruler or leader. There's always a leader because someone excels at something and we want them to lead us. They're better at it than we are. So leadership is not the problem. It's the disconnect between the people being led and the opinions and actions of the leader who are leading them. Like right now, technology is being imposed upon us by entrepreneurs with a lot of wealth, but we haven't asked them to take charge of our lives. So that's not a democracy. That's a demagoguery in the name of technology. They're simply despotic rulers forcing technology on us, whether we like it or not. There's no vote that's held every time the technology changes, but the technology will affect your life, but you don't get to really talk about it. See, that's not a democracy. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out, that when the population gets to a certain point, it's very difficult to have proper relationships between the governed and the one governing. So the diversity of the culture of Bharat came from a recognition of this. So you had what you might call principalities, where hopefully qualified people were in the leadership roles. And they did consider themselves answerable to the people because the Rajas of Bharat always had an open court methodology where any citizen could come in and ask questions and be heard and actually not talk to the servants of the Raja, but talk directly to the Raja and ask the question. So the biodiversity of Bharat is now spoken of politically as naive or as confusing. But is biodiversity confusing? You see, biodiversity is actually the sign of health.
Yeah.
Monoagriculture is something we've invented, and it destroys the environment, it exploits the land, and it makes inferior food. Yeah. So in fact, if you reverse it, the monoagriculture and monoral, monotheistic, monopolitical world that we live in is the worst possible world, because our opinion never reaches the person who's doing what they're doing.
Very true.
And they get to neglect us entirely. Yeah. So, in fact, all of these, and I'm going to give you the word for this, you've heard the saying, I've been framed?
No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Determine if you've been accused of a crime that you didn't do, and the evidence was planted so that it would look like you did it, that's called being framed.
Yeah.
Right. So when somebody colonizes a culture, they build a frame around it to prove you deserved it. So they speak badly of everything you do and give it a negative spin. It's called spin doctoring in modern advertising or politics. You spin it to make it look good. So what's happened is the whole culture of Bharat has been framed by its colonizers, and all the different departments of its behavior and its civilization that were effective, elegant, worked well, had checks and balances, created a beneficial effect. All of that has been framed negatively to justify colonization. So now that the culture of Bharat is recovering from being colonized, its diaspora citizens, as well as those still living there, all need to realize that they've been framed, and they need to learn how to take those frames apart, deconstruct them, and reframe it with the truth. And they need to do that in English, or their children are going to be convinced of all these negative frames because they're being taught them in school.
Right.
So this is part of my work in life, is my gift back to the culture that gave me everything, is to help them get unframed in English and to teach them how to use English to reframe themselves and to describe their civilization correctly, instead of continuing to speak of themselves in the despicable way that their colonizers did.
Very interesting, very interesting. And thank you for the noble work that you are doing, giving back to the culture that gave you Vedas. Now, that brings me to my next question, Jeffrey ji. You are a life coach and a relationship expert. So I ask you, what are the biggest problems that you think North America is facing now?
Well, I was going to include that in my discussion of our current problematic state of democracy. So let's connect the two.
Okay.
Let's say that families, which means groups of human beings that have bonded together with hopefully a certain purpose, aside from just making babies, but a societal purpose, an integrated cultural purpose that ties them together so that society can cooperate. So clearly, the world we live in, by colonization and now by everyone moving around, is very confused in this regard. So we can't sort it all out in just one set of comments. But the first step of this is, so restate your question again now so everyone can see where I'm going with this. So say your question again.
My question is, I want to ask you, what are the biggest problems that you see North America is facing right now?
Okay. So see, it is partially because we don't have communication from the bottom of the system socially to the top. It's as if your body wasn't getting oxygen to different limbs in your body, and there was no signal coming back about that, so they didn't know. So you were leaving your hands and feet without sufficient oxygen. In no time, the whole system would start to get dysfunctional.
Right.
That's where we are right now. So we have to have some kind of feedback system from the bottom of the system to the top of the system, or else the idea that that's a democracy is completely mistaken, because it is not a representative government at all. And the person voting doesn't really know how to continue to influence policy. There's no linkages. So let's first see that all of those linkages are broken, and that Vedic civilization tried not to break them. Okay. Now, there's a very important word in this that I want to share with you. If I asked you, what does the word Dhanam mean? Tell me what you would usually say in English, please.
Dhanam is to give.
Good. And so what is the other English word you might use?
Charity.
Thank you. So charity actually is a little bit condescending, because charity is what rich people do when they see somebody that doesn't have enough, they throw them a little. Or on a good day, they arrange for some to be given to them. But I would like to propose to you that charity is a mistranslation of Dhanam. It's to give, but the English word charity has the implication that is a little bit like that, giving it to someone on the street and they walk away with a little bit of charity. I want to propose to you that the word Dhanam means circulation.
Oh.
You wouldn't say that your heart is giving charity to your hands and feet.
Right.
You would say it's circulating energy appropriately to all the parts of the body. So let's do the caste system while we're at it. So here's the Brahmins, here's the Kshatriyas, here's the Vaishyas, and I won't show you my feet, but there's the Shudras. So that simply means I've given them new names: professor, protector,
Right.
producer,
Wow.
provider. So Shudra means performing services. Vaishya means producing food or income out of things and moving them around and making them appropriately available to everyone. Kshatriya means protecting. Doesn't mean only harming. It means to hurt and protect, or sometimes hurt while protecting. And then Brahman means to act as the information and knowledge source. Therefore, this one gets less money. This one doesn't also care about money, just honor and truth. This one cares about money, but has a code of conduct to not abuse that. And the so-called lowest is the one we depend on most. So they have to be truthful, confidential, and protect us because they know all our secrets. The people that clean your house know all your secrets. They can get your house robbed tomorrow.
Right.
So these are not castes. They're varnas, and varna means they're ways of working. So now let's tie that to dharma. When the word dharma is applied to what you're best at as your task within matter, it's called your sva dharma. Sva dharma means one's own. Sva. So it's not Sanatan. It's not things that are always true for everybody.
Yeah.
It's the make and model of the automobile you're driving and how it's best used. Is it a pickup truck? Is it a sports car, a race car? What's its function? The ancient Vedic civilization. Now, the reason I'm saying this is your question led me back to saying that I'm a Jyotishi.
Mm-hmm.
Jyotishis helped to organize society according to function. And so they worked with the school teachers, watching the children unfold as they grew up. And instead of imposing an occupation on them, they drew their true occupation out of them so that the child would grow up to an adult whose work in the world, whose service to the world was the one they were designed to do, therefore they would be happy. Now, this is the answer to the relationship question. If you're a pickup truck and you marry a race car, and if we strap those two vehicles together, is that going to work well?
No.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Is it because two people don't respect each other? No, that's not it. Is it because they may not love each other? No, that's not it. It's because they can't be true to themselves together. So the Vedic civilization had thought all of this through and tried as elders to help people who didn't yet have life experience to not put themselves in untenable situations. By that I mean the over 60% divorce rate of Western civilization. Because again, no disrespect, but the Abrahamic religions never thought about any of this. Because they don't have reincarnation, they can't ask you what car you're in. So science and religion are separate in Western civilizations and throughout the world. In the Vedic civilization, there is no separation. Science, psychology, physiology, medicine, body types, varnas, the way you work, Shreni, your career, Jati, your career, Shreni, your place in that career, was all well thought out so that as much as possible, everyone was doing what they were meant to do, which means what they liked, and therefore the social body would be as happy as possible. That's a pretty big picture. But what I want you to then see is that when two cells in the social body decide to come together, they're proposing to do something more complicated than they can understand. Without concerned elders, whom they respect, giving them advice on how to do that, they'll probably run away with the wrong person. And if they're not careful, make a baby too soon. Sound familiar? And then that child will be raised with only one parent. And welcome to the modern world. So if the colonizers want to criticize India, they're going to have to talk to me first, because I want to ask them about that 60% divorce rate and about a democracy where no one really is connected to the leaders, and a myriad of other things that I learned from the Vedic civilization.
That was a very interesting answer, and I love the way you explained the Varna system and explaining Swadharma and Dharma through examples that everybody can relate to in the modern world. So your insight and perspective was really amazing. Now, my next question is related to this North American issues, North American society only. How do you think the Canadian Hindus, the Hindus, those who stay here, those who have taken up Canada as their homeland, effectively contribute to the Canadian society?
All right. They're certainly related questions, aren't they? Because the question that we should be asking ourselves is, when we're living in a society that has some reasonable principles of conduct, and I would say that about Canada, that if I compared it to the United States, since I have lived in both and have a great deal of knowledge of both the benefits and problems in both. So if you think about Canada from that perspective, the large amount of land and small amount of population is in its favor and in its disfavor. In its favor, because we tend to treat each other a little bit more softer, a little more less aggressively, because we haven't had to be aggressive over resources. And there hasn't been as much history of violence in Canada as there has been in the United States. After all, the Civil War was quite ugly and killed 500,000 people. Canada doesn't have a bad memory like that to carry around. So far, the different populations have managed to get along fairly well. But we can't forget that, and I'm going to say this again very carefully, the weaponized versions of Christianity and Islam, especially, have gone throughout the world raping, pillaging, and colonizing. To say this of all Christians and all Muslims would be a travesty, because it's simply not the case. But for them not to admit that there are bad players within their religions creating a bad reputation for them, that's them not being responsible. So in my opinion, first of all, any sincere Christian or sincere Muslim needs to turn to their compatriots who hold the same religion and say, stop using coercion and violence. Just stop.
Right.
Because under no system is that acceptable.
Right. But
it is true that both of those religions have, throughout the last 2,000 years of history, in unbelievably terrible ways, gone throughout the world and burned libraries, destroyed civilizations, destroyed temples, destroyed religion, killed people, raped women, made slaves, a multitude of terrible, terrible things. And if all of us are idealistic, we can just hope that nothing like that is repeated again in the name of any kind of reasonable government or religion. We can hope that we never use our superpowers now, which are so destructive, upon one another, that we start to understand each other and find ways to do so. I personally believe this is the great strength that the Hindu culture brings to the discussion. But they were bred in an environment that wished that everyone could find a way to talk about their problems rather than be violent about them. And violence was reserved for very extreme situations. And like I said, usually for people who were qualified to handle that without causing wide destruction. This is very important. I want to add something to this. Sometimes the Mahabharata conflict is called a war. I beg to differ. The modern word war is when one country destroys the citizens, buildings, and cultural artifacts and civilization of another country. Whoever does that is despicable. Whoever drops bombs on innocent bystanders in a country is despicable. No proper warrior would ever do such a thing. So in the Mahabharata conflict, supposedly about 4 to 8 million people lost their lives. There were farmers a half a mile away who were completely safe. Nobody left the football field. It would be just like now you're watching a soccer game or a football game, and the players on the field go off and start running through the audience and killing people. We wouldn't think that was a great football game. We'd think that was a horrible massacre. So to me, it's very, very important to say that there was never a time in the recorded history of Bharat that they left their own boundary and went out and raped and pillaged and colonized forcibly other cultures. Instead, they sent cultural ambassadors who were then welcomed. And only if there was an interest in their civilization did they then teach that to the Greeks, to the Romans. In the time of supposedly the time of Jesus, there were 150 ships a year coming from India to Rome. Most people have no idea of this. 150. In the Senate record of Rome at that time, there's an entry that says, we've got to stop spending all of our money in India on beautiful fabrics for our wives.
Mm-hmm.
So this means there was already a huge cultural exchange, because think of how many dock workers and other people there were from India in Rome 2,000 years ago at the time of Jesus, supposedly. If that was indeed when Jesus was there, he couldn't have not known about India and the Vedas, because there were thousands of people from India in Rome at that time. Who's ever told us this? Who's ever told us that there was a Shiva temple and a Durga temple in Rome?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a well-known historical fact amongst historians, because the Romans tolerated the different traditions from different civilizations and said, yeah, well, we have our gods, you have yours, that's cool.
Yeah.
So this is all part of a bigger worldview that we're now, historically, our children and the people of the world haven't learned to see this way and think this way. So our biggest danger with immigration right now is that the countries are not setting the terms of being a citizen clearly enough. From my feeling, and knowledge, what Canada, for example, needs to do is to say any immigrant signs this following agreement. It says this: I will never try to get a certain numerical size to my community and institute a different kind of law, which is the law of our book. I will never impose Christian law, Sharia law, any kind of law. We will remain a democracy. But then it's also possible that the minority group will try to outpopulate the other groups and then take over, and then they'll change the law. So we all need to be aware of this as a historical problem. So all I can say about this, because it's such a big subject, is that the Vedic civilization does not have a reputation for doing this.
Yeah.
They do not go in, build their population, or go in and rape and pillage, or go in and build their population as an immigrant and then take over and then exercise draconian rules and proceed in a violent and aggressive way to control the situation. So we can only hope, but to me, this is the missing point right now, is that the Hindu community is not quite prepared to talk about themselves in English yet and to be full participants in the governments where they're present, and to make sure that the other groups of any kind, indigenous or otherwise, meaning Caucasian here or those moving in, don't have an agenda like that. So in other words, we have to talk about this to prevent it. We don't want to get to the point where it leads to violence. So Canada, at least, is an excellent smaller population environment where the Hindu immigrants could be influential, but as yet don't really know how to do so. But I'm convinced that even what we're doing right now is a renaissance of Hindu Vedic thought, and it's just the sun's just about to rise again, so that everyone who is Hindu will know how to talk in English about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And by knowing that, we'll be able to talk away these problems without ever having to get violent in the streets over them. That should be our common wish. It is the wish of every Hindu.
Yeah. That was very nice. Yes, I completely agree that we need a platform, or we need a group that talks about Vedic culture, that explains to people about Vedic culture and the Vedic Dharma. And I completely agree with you that yes, that is what the role of Canadian Hindus should be towards the Canadian society.
They should be ambassadors.
Yeah, we need to be the ambassadors of our culture, and for that I think we need to understand our cultures ourselves well first. That was very insightful, Jeffrey ji. Now, because you are such an influential keynote speaker, I would like to know from you, what would you say to a younger generation, not just the Hindus, younger generation in general? about the Vedas and their values?
I would start with the following. I would say if they can continue to respect the courage and tenacity and hard work of their parents and not hold it against them that their English is not perfect, you can only do so much. In the world of English usage, because I was a literature poetry major and because of my horoscope and my disposition, I'm what you would call an upper 1% English user. But you certainly cannot expect that of anyone, nor would I be that if I went to India and lived. I would be a lower 10% Hindi speaker for 10 years to come, probably, until I got so comfortable, or at least 5. So I think it's important that every Hindu family that's in an immigrant situation have a way of talking about this to their children and warn them that everything they hear in school is not true and that everyone needs an education, but that much of that educational system is slanted against their own culture. So in other words, I think of it almost as a kind of, since we're in a supposed epidemic right now, which we'll accept at least as theoretically possible, then it's possible that there's things we can do to protect our immune system, eat a healthy life, live a healthy life, think healthy thoughts, do our meditations. You note I did not say get inoculated. I don't think that is the solution. I think lifestyle medicine is the solution personally. And extreme actions should only come from when they're absolutely necessary. But what I'm trying to say is that if the parents of Hindu youth right now learn how to explain the bridge between the ancient world to the modern world to their children, and even ask their children to be gentle with them because their children are now first English users, first language users. And this is going to create a gap, a generation gap, because they're going to know how to speak English better than their parents. And it could make them become disrespectful if we're not careful. So there's 2 parts to this. I think it is important that persons like myself be used inside the immigrant communities around the world of the culture from India, so that we can be professors in favor of the deep culture of Bharat and help their children to have Caucasian role models that are deep practitioners whose fundamental premises are the same as their parents and their civilization. It's our way of being of service. And it's a necessary next step that the parents need to change the way they talk about things and put some effort out to learn. It's part of being an immigrant. They need to do that, and they owe it to their children, even more than themselves, so that they keep up. And I know it's unfair to ask because they're already working so hard, but I'm afraid it's the necessary, just as I've had to study Sanskrit and work very hard to learn this knowledge so deeply. So every Hindu family, the parents need to assume that if they don't become literate in crossing the bridge between English and their culture, their children may disrespect them and not listen to them and stop listening to them at a very young age and make their authorities be people who are really not qualified for that. And this shouldn't be a random process. So I think what you're doing right now and what this video represents is the next steps in this renaissance of doing this. And conversely, you should have the thought leaders who are the acharyas of your civilization, making sure that people like myself speak correctly. So I should accept editing from the acharyas of the Vedic civilization. You should expect them to vet me out. And then, vice versa, I should be able to teach you quickly the key words not to say and to say, so you can change your conversation, your ability to converse on certain topics, and now you won't lose the respect of the next generation. So that's part of the answer. The last part of it is, If I asked you, what is the missing vitamin at all Hindu mandirs? Would you tell me? Can you think of what it would be? What is the single missing vitamin at all the mandirs?
Single missing vitamin in all?
What is the thing that should be present that's not there? It's a tough question.
I know it's a tough question. I think we ourselves do not know about a culture that well.
You're on it. So what else? So what would follow from that? If we're the people, if we're not the people of a book, what are we?
We need to explore. We need to first understand. We need to study our own texts first.
We're the people of a library.
Yeah.
So what's missing at all Hindu mandirs is a library.
Oh.
What's missing is Saraswati.
Yes.
And they're fine as they are, each with a different flavor. That's fine. Each as a social hub. That's important. But what's missing is they do not have a library.
We do not have a library.
Let me show you the consequence of this. This means that when people write books about the Vedic Dharma, trying to be sincere teachers of it, there's no audience for them.
Yes.
If right now, all the mandirs across the planet decided that whenever there's a very useful book that's written about their culture by anyone, 100,000 copies of that book are purchased by wealthy Hindus, so they spend 10% less on the wedding and a little bit on books. Buy those books, send them free to every Hindu mandir until it has one of the best libraries in the city it's in on the subject of its own culture. Now you've provided a livelihood for the sincere people writing books. You now have Saraswati back in your civilization. Your children will read those books, or there'll be videos or other things. Whatever it is, there'll be cultural centers. Right now, the Hindu culture is a culture without Saraswati. And Saraswati means a library, and secondarily, a center for the arts. So if the mandir becomes a center for the arts, dance, music, all those things, poetry, performance, putting on plays, and if it has a library, this will quickly shift the imbalance in the culture. If talks like this went around to every one of those libraries, then they would not just reach 1,000 people, they would reach 10 million people. If this is facilitated by the current wealthy Indian civilizational leaders, if they know where to spend their money, that, in my opinion, is where it needs to be spent, aside from helping people from dire poverty or in calamities. Mm. And the second one is bringing Ayurvedic medicine in as a legitimate medical system, and so we don't just have allopathic medicine. Those two things, both Saraswati things, will shift the whole situation. So that's my brief answer in the midst of this Hindu Renaissance.
Thank you so much for that, Jeffrey ji. Yes, we indeed need a library, and we need to pay more attention to Saraswati. We need to propagate it, and we need to accept that, yes, Saraswati imparts education, so we need to honor it more. We've talked so much about Vedic culture. We talked about Vedic society, Dharma, Sanatan Dharma. Now, I know you've been writing books. You are an award-winning poet. So now this question is only from your perspective, only about you. So what are your recent projects and books that you are planning to write or you're writing, working on?
Well, I did mention them before, but thank you. I'll mention one more time.
You did mention.
The first is a translation of the Bhagavad Gita, and you should have, but aren't there very many? And I would say yes. And each one in its own way brilliant in many cases. A few that were translated by someone who should not have tried to do that, but many, many by sincere acharyas in the Vedic culture. But all of them were misusing English and didn't know how to correctly get all of the meanings across. So think of translation as a several generation project rather than just one person. So I represent the next step in this as a process where we'll remove about 100 English words from all the translation processes, and they'll no longer be there. So let me explain this by telling you the meaning of one word. I'm not going to ask you what it means because I already know you would not know the dictionary definition. So please tell me don't tell me, but I'll ask everyone, reflect upon what is the meaning of the word God? And I don't mean your meaning. Just like if I asked you, what is the meaning of the word bridge? You'd look in a dictionary and it would say a bridge is this contraption built to span a body of water where it goes between two things and carries people safely across. That's called a definition. That's what I want. I want the dictionary definition of God. And no person in North America I've ever asked that has known. But they would throw something at it. They'd say, I don't know, the creator. The Hindus are very generous. They'll say creator, organizer, and destroyer. But that's not what the English word God means. That's a Hindu trying to bring the creator and the maintainer and the destroyer in and cleverly trying to do that. But that's not the meaning of the English word God, nor is it where the word came from. Okay. But it is the single word used by Christianity to point in the direction of the source of everything. So that's the go-to word. And superficially, there's no problem with that, really. The problem would be if you tell me that God and Bhagavan mean the same thing. Because the word Bhagavan is described in several places, but specifically in the Vishnu Purana, as that being, that person who has 6 characteristics to an unlimited degree: beauty, wealth, strength, fame, knowledge, and some say renunciation, some say generosity. Those are called the 6 bhagas. So bhaga, van means one who possesses, and bhaga means those 6 characteristics to an unlimited degree. So every one of us has some beauty, some knowledge, some power, but raise your hand if you have unlimited amounts of all 6 to an unlimited degree. My hand's not going up. That's named Bhagavan. So, is the word God a synonym? Does it mean the same thing? Now I'm going to tell you the secret. The word God occurs 4 times in the Bhagavad Gita. Mm-hmm. But you don't know that. Nobody thinks the English word God is in the Bhagavad Gita because the Gita is Sanskrit. You know, Bahunam Janmanamanti, Jnanavan Mam Prapadyate, Vasudeva Sarvamiti, Samahatma Sudra. How can God be in the Sanskrit dictionary? Well, because the word God was borrowed from Sanskrit. So that's already interesting. The one Christian go-to word for the supreme being is a direct borrow from Sanskrit. And raise your hand if you already knew that. Nobody's hand is going up. Okay, so now, how did that happen? Well, it turns out that German did not come from Latin. It originally came from Sanskrit. So, if you learn Italian, Italian is just like Hindi is to Sanskrit, Italian is to Latin. So, Latin and Italian and Spanish and Portuguese and French, those are called Romance languages descended from Latin. But German, this is why Hitler used Vedic symbolism to represent the terrible things that he did, sadly. But that's because German language comes from Sanskrit. The word in Sanskrit occurs 4 times in the Bhagavad Gita. And the word is hutam, Hutam. Brahmarpanam, Brahma Agnau, Brahma Tata Samanina, Brahma Hutam. When there's an Agnihotra Yagya, different things are present. The Hotri, who's performing it. The Havan, the fire pit, which gives us the word oven, by the way. And then there's the Grishma, the ghee. Then there's the Aushadya, the incense. And then there's the Agni, which is already there, receiving. And then there's Svaha, that's the Shakti of Agni. And then there's what we put in the fire and the smoke that rises. In Sanskrit, that's called hutam. The word hutam went into German and became gutam, into Dutch and became gut, and into English and became God. So the English word God is the smoke arising from a pagan fire sacrifice. We being the pagans. The word pagan comes from the word Bhagan or Bhagavan. We're the Bhagans, the Pagans. See the pronunciation? Pagan, yeah. Bhagavan. Yeah, it's from Bhagavan. We're those beings who adhere to Bhagavan as the ultimate supreme being. So we're the Pagans. And a temple is called a pagoda by the time it gets to China, but it's a pagoda. It's where Bhagavan is. So does hutam exactly mean the same thing as Bhagavan? Now you say absolutely not. No possible way. It's the smoke arising in a yagya. And in the Gita, Bhagavan says, I'm the ghee, I'm the incense, I'm the fire, I'm the person doing it, I'm the mantra. Oh yeah, and I'm the smoke arising when you make the offering. But that doesn't mean that hutam is an exact synonym for Bhagavan. I have never met anyone in Indian civilization who knew this.
I didn't know it either.
I have never met anyone. And this is the work I've been doing for 10 years to get the linguistics correct. The irony is that Christianity, which all too often makes themselves superior to a culture like the Vedic, borrowed one small, relatively insignificant word, ironically, from the fire offering to the many gods, from their perspective, a pagan word, and made it into their only word for the supreme being. Isn't that ironic and funny and humorous? It is. And then said, we're the superior culture. Ha ha ha, we borrowed one of your small words and made it our supreme being. You've got to let it sink in. It's funny. It's ironic. It's also crazy. Now, I'm not being disrespectful. If they call the supreme being a nickname, if they say, I don't care if they say, my sweetie. If you say the supreme being is my sweetie, I'll say, that's wonderful, mine too. But if you say, this name is our name, I say, no, that's Sanskrit. You just didn't see it come in through German a little while back. And then you grabbed a hold of it and said, that'll do. But that culture it came from, they're a bunch of pagans. No, I'm sorry. They're a bunch of scholars. They're the smartest civilization the world has known. They were the source of science, the source of mathematics, the source of linguistics, the source of the dictionaries. England didn't even have a dictionary till the 15th century. Sanskrit has always had a dictionary and etymology and all these deep meanings. So my point in all of this is the work I'm doing. You asked.
Yeah.
I am arranging the languages so that we understand what they really mean, because that's what I learned from Sanskrit. My professor of Sanskrit, Ramanath Sharma, was teaching at the East-West Center at the University of Hawaii. He was from Benares, And as a child, he had memorized all 4,000 grammatical rules of the Ashtadhyayi of Panini. You would say something in Sanskrit and he would say rule number 2121, and he would give you the rule. 4,000 grammatical rules. Have you ever met anyone who knows that much about language? I haven't.
No.
Not before or since. It's remarkable. Whereas the English language is irregular, difficult to learn, things sound the same and spelled differently. It's a very awkward, jumbled up language. So it's been being used to describe the Vedic knowledge incorrectly, but it was a start. And I'm glad of that start. It got me started. So in my opinion, the next step is all of us just becoming more literate, because to be a Hindu is to be a member of the Society of the Library. And if everybody can just remember that, if that's the only thing you remember from this talk, just think of me as the representative of Saraswati, whose mission is to see a library in every Hindu mandir and to have everyone understand which English words are correct to use for their own civilizational definitions and which ones not to use. And I just chose this one word, God, as a sort of symbol of what I'm doing. But there are hundreds of words like that that are not the correct translation of these very important, very deep and profound Sanskrit words. So the last 10 years of my life have been dedicated to this mission. And those books I hope will be coming out over the next 2 years. We are Brahmins in the sense of our livelihood and our the way we live. So if anyone is greatly inspired by this and wants to help those books come out, I would deeply appreciate it, because that's what it's going to take to get them out there. More than anything, I hope that this fire gets lit and the Saraswati River that went underground 5,000 or so years ago comes back and flows on the surface. And Pushpa, it's a delight having you questioning me, because I met your amazing daughter, who is certainly Saraswati personified, and come back. And I was so in awe of her. I immediately just pranamed and went, oh, I know who that is. So she, to me, is the new flower in the new growth of the lotuses of the Vedic civilization. And I'm certain that if we think of this as a cultural revolution, no one will think we're going to grab guns and be dangerous. If we bring back music, dance, the arts, theater, literature, knowledge, science, how can we be but good players in the world that we're trying to build? And the rest, in a sense, we're not in charge of. I'm not in charge of. I don't have any weapons. I don't want any. The only thing I want is the light of Brahman to shine through the words that I use, as the rishis hoped, so that the vibrations of Sanskrit, the mantras and the language, edify and enlighten and awaken and educate a world that is just sadly covered in darkness and hurting because they are. So thank you so much for asking all of these beautiful questions.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. And I would like to close it with a line that you said. We are all waiting for that Saraswati to emerge that has gone underground 5,000 years. And we all should and will be working towards it so that it comes up again. And the Vedic culture is brought to the forefront. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for your time, for your knowledge, for your clear perspective, and whatever. It was my pleasure. I think I've been honored to talk to you, to listen to you firsthand, to have one-to-one conversation with you. I am really blessed. Namaste.
Thank you so much. And I'll end with this on my part. Since I began with Guru Brahma, let me tell you what it's like coming from the outside. Om Agana Timirandasya Ganangana Salakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Genatasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. You see, I was born in darkness. You weren't. You were born in the midst of this knowledge. You received it in your breast milk. You received it in the love and affection of your grandmother, of your father and your mother, and of your culture. I was born in a desert. I was born in darkness. So I know This mantra says, I was blind. I couldn't see. Om Gana, Timirandasya. My guru came, Ganangana, and forced open my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. So when that is your firsthand experience, then we are two different functional parts of this renaissance. You are the genetic carriers of the civilization, something that I do not have the grace to be this lifetime. But I, who has switched my account over, there's a saying in English, no fanatic like a new convert. So I am the new torchbearer of the Vedic civilization. I do not carry it in my genes. I cannot be its perfect representative. I am worse than Malecha. I am worse than outcast in origin. I come from a beef eating, pork eating, alcohol drinking, nothing great to say about the daily habits. They were sweet people, caring people, and loving. I was very fortunate in that regard. They did their best and raised me. I'm so grateful. But I was reborn by my gurus, plural, and the Veda is the mother and the gurus are the father, whether they're male or female. So this is our symbiosis, in my opinion. I am a torchbearer and I will help you relight your torch. If you will be my cultural teacher and teach me to be as gracious, beautiful, and profound as you are. Together, the millions of non-Indian yogis and the diaspora Indian civilization, if you bring those two groups together, we will have a renaissance that will be beautiful to behold. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey ji.
Namaste.
Namaste.